Grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. We're looking at the rest of John chapter 18 and what I'm titling God on Trial Part 2. Now, there are a couple things I want you to know before I get in there. All right. First of all, John gives us an abbreviated version of the trial. He doesn't go into a whole lot of detail into it because John wants to present to us who Jesus is and that Jesus is God. That is the main focus of John's gospel. Now, if you want to read about the rest of the trials, and maybe someday we'll get to those, is that you could read those in the other gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke go into greater detail. But we're going to be seeing some characters now. We've already seen Caiaphas as the high priest. We've also seen Annas, his father-in-law. And Annas was the one who really called the shots. And this is all during the illegal trials, the unjust trials that were against Jewish law that Jesus is going through. Now we're going to see a man named Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate was a Roman governor, and he was the governor over Judea. So he had jurisdiction over the Jews. That means anything that was going to be tried was going to be tried in front of Pilate first, and if it went past Pilate, then it would go to Caesar. So, and what we're not going to see is the next step after this is that Pilate is going to realize that Jesus did nothing wrong. So he sends him to King Herod. King Herod was a Roman who was appointed the king of Israel. But Herod himself doesn't want anything to do with this. He has no time for it. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even interest him. And he sends him back to Pilate, which is what we'll see next week. But in the meantime, we're going to hear the exchange between Pilate and Jesus. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas' presence into the palace. It was now early in the morning, and the Jews themselves did not go into the palace for fear that they would be contaminated and would not be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate walked out to them and said, "What is this charge you are bringing against this man?" "If he were not an evildoer, we would not have handed him over to you," they replied. To which Pilate retorted, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your own law." "We are not allowed to put a man to death," replied the Jews. This is fulfilling the prophecy that Jesus spoke about on how he would die. So Pilate went back into the palace and called Jesus to him. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked. "Are you asking this on your own accord?" Jesus replied, "or have other people spoken to you about me?" "You think I'm a Jew?" replied Pilate. "It's your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What have you done anyway?" "My kingdom is not founded in this world. If it were, my servants would have fought to prevent my being handed over to the Jews. But in fact, my kingdom is not founded in all this." "So you are a king," returned Pilate. "Indeed, I am a king," Jesus replied. "The reason for my birth and the reason for my coming into this world is to witness to the truth. Every man who loves truth recognizes my voice." To which Pilate retorted, "What is truth?" And then went straight out again to the Jews and said, "I find nothing criminal about him at all. But I have an arrangement with you to set one prisoner free at Passover time. Do you wish me to set free for you the king of the Jews?" At this they shouted out again, "No, not this man, but Barabbas." Barabbas was a bandit. So Pilate brings Jesus in, questions him. He says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he was kind of asking him like in a snide way. And Jesus said, "Yeah, listen, you just spoke that I am, okay? So did you get that on your own, or did you talk to other people that heard me talk?" So this is where Jesus is going. And Jesus, again, is polite with Pilate. He's putting it back to Pilate so Pilate can react. And Pilate really is asking Jesus, "Are you a king that I have to worry about, that Rome has to worry about? Are you a threat to Rome?" And Jesus' reply is, "No, I'm not," is what he's saying. He's saying, "I'm not a threat to Rome." So Pilate asks him, "So I guess you are a king then?" And Jesus tells him, "Yes, I am, but I'm not a king of this world." Jesus is referring to his place in heaven. And he's telling Pilate that I'm not from here. I'm a king. My kingdom is not from here. My kingdom does not originate here. My kingdom originates in heaven. And that's the distinction he's making. So this way, Pilate basically could be at ease. He doesn't have to worry about Jesus. So Pilate is not seeing anything wrong with Jesus. But the Jews had an agreement with Rome at the time that every Passover they could have one prisoner released. So Pilate has this great opportunity in his hand. He's like, okay, I can either let him go, or I could leave it up to them and let them decide. So he does. He leaves it up to them for them to decide. The Jewish leaders say, no, crucify this man. We want Barabbas. Now, that day, the Romans had already set up 3 crosses. One of those crosses was for Barabbas. Barabbas was what was known, and the Bible translation calls him a bandit. Some Bible translations call him a thief or a criminal. But what he really was, the way the translations come out, was he was an insurrectionist. He was always starting trouble. He was always starting riots because he did not like the occupation of Rome. This was the Roman Empire. They occupied Israel. They were the great power of the world at the time. Barabbas didn't want any part of it. He didn't want it. So he would constantly rise up against them and constantly get people to rise up with him. So the interesting part is that there are 3 crosses set up, and one of them was for Barabbas, and one of them was the other 2 that joined with Barabbas in fighting against Rome. Jesus took his place. Jesus went on that cross instead of Barabbas. Jesus died in place of Barabbas, which is exactly how we need to look at what Jesus did on the cross. He died for Barabbas in place of Barabbas, and he died for us in place of us. Because we have sinned, humanity has sinned against God, and God has to reconcile because he loves us so much that he wants us with him. And I've been teaching you this through this entire book, that the whole point is that Jesus wants us with him. And in order for us to be with him, we have to be made perfect. But because we are human, because we are flesh, we are not perfect, we cannot coexist with spirit. And that's what Jesus is. And that's how, and in order for us to get there with him, he has to die in our place, which he did, which was what we're going to be reading about in another chapter or so. So that's what I want you to understand, is that this cross, these 3 crosses were set up so that Jesus could occupy one of them, so that Jesus could take the place of one criminal and wind up taking the place of all criminals. That's me, that's you, that's every person ever born and every person who will be born. That's the gospel. That's what we concentrate on. We look at what Jesus did for us for us on the cross. So next week we're going to be looking at the second trial between Jesus and Pilate, and Pilate's going to do everything he can not to have to crucify Jesus. So have yourself a good week.